Jason opened his eyes and was immediately blinded by the sun. He groaned, squeezing his eyes shut again, and watched as splotches of colors danced behind his eyelids. He waited until they dimmed, and then opened his eyes slowly, turning his face to the side to avoid the sun's merciless, penetrating glare. He was surprised to meet Sophie's gaze. She smiled at him, showing her teeth. She looked so beautiful. Jason had always thought she was comely, but right now he could not help but be mesmerized by the way her skin glowed and her eyes sparkled. Talk about sappy and cliché. "You fell asleep," she said in a honeyed, teasing voice. Jason blinked at her. "I did?" he said. He didn't remember falling asleep. He lifted himself up and looked around. They were resting in a clearing in the woods. The air was warm and alive. Bugs could be seen streaming through the air. Birds fluttered between branches and small creatures dashed along the underbrush. It all seemed so normal. Jason's mind felt confused. He couldn't help feeling like he had just had the worst nightmare. Or maybe he was forgetting something horrible. Sophie touched his chin and brought his face towards her. Wow, Jason thought. Everything about her right now is just, wow. "What's going on in that brain, babe?" she said. Jason blinked at her again. Did she just call him what he thought she did? What was going on? "What did you call me?" he said. She raised an eyebrow at him, keeping a smirk on her face. "Don't tell me you forgot," she said. "I'm your girlfriend." Jason reeled. Never in a million years did he think Sophie would be his girlfriend. Had she really been into him? He grabbed his head. Why couldn't he get anything straight in his head? When did they start dating? Questions flowed through him in a river of uncertainty. "Hey guys," a voice called to them. Jason looked up. Ryan was there, half hidden in a patch of tall grass. He was waving at them. Sophie waved back, uttering a little laugh. Jason thought it might be the most enchanting sound he has ever heard. "Come over here," Ryan said. "I found something really cool." Sophie was on her feet quickly, yet Jason remained still. Somehow, those words did not sit right with him. He felt like something had been found in his nightmare. His heart began to pound in his chest. "Let's not keep Ryan waiting," Sophie said, offering her hand to him. Jason took it and she helped him to his feet. He brushed leaves and grass off his clothes. Then a question came to his mind. "Where is everybody else?" he said. Sophie gave him an odd look. "What do you mean?" she said. "It's only us out here." Jason furrowed his brow. "But weren't we out here with Derek, Kyle, Amber, Sophie, and Megan?" he said. "I could have sworn." Sophie cut off his words. "No," she said, her tone flat. "They aren't a part of this. Come on, let's see what Ryan found." She grabbed his hand and pulled him along before Jason could think of anything else to say. Soon they joined Ryan, who pointed further into the grass with an excited look on his face. "Finally, look," he said. They looked. What Jason saw made his mouth drop open. Sophie squealed in delight. It was a bird nest. 2 spotted, blue eggs were inside, and 1 had hatched. The chick was fluffing its furry feathers and giving hungry peeps. Jason smiled. Baby birds were too cute. The other eggs moved. The shells bulged from the inside, cracking along the thin surface. Soon their beaks poked through, and slowly they emerged alongside their sibling. 2 more hungry voices were added to the first. It was not long until the parents came, and the feeding ritual began. The children watched this with soft wonder, making ooh and ah sounds whenever the birds did something that pulled at their heartstrings. Eventually, Jason again began to feel like something was missing. He looked around. The woods seemed to look back. "Guys, are you sure the others aren't around?" he said. As one, Sophie and Ryan turned to look at him. Their smiles were gone, and their eyes were cold. "They're not here," Ryan said, his tone icy. "They're not coming," Sophie said, her voice matching his. Jason looked at them. The feeling that something was terribly wrong hit him like a freight train. Then their eyes went pale, and they began to glow. Jason tried to scream, but his mouth simply went slack, and all at once, his fears disappeared. He slipped again into darkness and knew no more. Jason opened his eyes. He sat up, this time in his own bed. He rubbed his head and thought he had had a bad dream, something involving Sophie, maybe someone else. What had happened exactly? He couldn't really remember. He was distracted from his troubled thoughts when his nose detected a delectable scent. He sniffed the air, drawing the sweet fumes into his lungs. He knew it could only be one thing: his father's pancakes. Jason threw off the covers and bounded out of his room. He trampled down the stairs and thundered into the kitchen. His socks skidded to a halt by his seat. He pulled the chair out and plopped down. "Something smells delicious," he said, looking towards the kitchen. "Does it?" his father said, smiling at him. He flipped a pancake on the griddle. Then he scooped up a heaping plate and brought over the steaming pile. He laid it in front of Jason, who clapped his hands. "Dig in, son. No need to hold back." Jason was happy to take his father at his word. Soon, his plate was filled with pancakes swimming in maple syrup and topped with thick slices of butter. His fork began to hack into the fluffy dough. He pinned a few pieces, and they promptly disappeared into his mouth. Jason moaned with pleasure. "Dad, these are the best ever," he said. "He has really outdone himself." His mom agreed. Jason looked over at her. He could have sworn she hadn't been with him at the table a moment ago. His stomach rumbled, and he decided it didn't matter. More pancakes were the only thing that really mattered. As Jason continued to eat, something started to nag at him, a feeling he couldn't place, other than the sensation of missing. Yes, he was missing something, or rather, something was amiss. "Why aren't you eating, honey?" his mother said. "Huh?" Jason said, coming out of his thoughts. His heart quickened when he caught his mom and dad staring at him. They had smiles on their faces and looks of concern, yet something seemed off. Their gazes were too glassy and their smiles too wide. They were completely still, like statues, or like dolls, or something else that Jason didn't want to contemplate. Yet his mind went there. They're so still. It's almost like they're dead, he thought. As if they heard his thoughts, both of their heads cocked to the side. "Son," his father said, his tone much colder than before. "You look tired." "Yes," his mother said. "It's time for you to sleep again." Jason's heart leapt into his throat. "Sleep?" he said, beginning to be afraid. "What do you mean, sleep again?" Their smiles only widened. Their eyes flowed to white. Then they began to glow. Jason tried to scream, but he was falling once again into obliterating darkness. Jason felt a sudden pain stab through him. He came awake in that darkness, screaming as a hot flare seemed to pierce right through his chest. Yet he couldn't be sure. He was only aware of the pain. He couldn't see anything in the darkness. He couldn't feel the physical world. "What's happening to me?" he wondered. He was screaming again as the pain flashed through him, leaving a burning mark that ached and throbbed. Color began to creep into the void, color and light. Shadows formed around a dark figure that hovered over him. Fear leapt inside him, and he tried to scream, but what came from him was a mere croak. "You're waking," a man's voice said to him. "That is good." Jason's mind was fogged. He remembered strange lights. No, there was a good memory. Something with his parents. Yet, something went wrong. He shook his head. He just couldn't put the picture together. Something cold touched his cheek, and that's when his mind jerked awake. He looked up into a masked face. The figure of the man was cloaked and hooded. He could see nothing of him except the billowing shroud. Jason screamed, crawling backwards. His hand slipped on something slick, and he toppled sideways. He came face to face with the something covered in slime. It lay limp, tangled, and shriveled. It was flesh, but Jason could tell it was no normal flesh. The fleshy pile suddenly twitched, and Jason saw a black eye become unveiled. A voice scream tore from his mouth, and he jumped backwards. He bumped his head hard into the wall. "Are you quite done?" the figure said. Jason looked over. The man was standing now, black-gloved hands to his side. Jason only gawked from him to the withering flesh. Now that Jason took a good look, he saw that the black eye was not moving. It was glassy and dead. The thing was just shrinking, drying out. The slime was dissipating into the air with a small hiss. Jason temporarily wondered if its fumes would be toxic. "We must go," the man said. "Your friends are still in danger. This is not a place you should linger any longer." Jason looked at the man. He was tall, and besides the mask and gloved hands, Jason saw that the being was mostly formless, yet he did not give the same aura as the other entities in the moving house. He was something else. His clothes billowed around him like smoke. It actually reminded him slightly of the red mist, except his instinct told him that this phenomenon was not a threat. A crazy question entered his mind. "Are you a wizard?" he said. There was silence, and for a moment, Jason thought the man would laugh at him. Under the circumstances, though, Jason thought that a perfectly plausible question. The man did not laugh, and after a moment, he answered with a vague deflection. "I am something you would not understand," he said. Before Jason could say anything, the man's head turned at a sudden screeching sound. It sounded like a million fingernails dragging over a chalkboard. "More are coming. We must go and find the others." Jason followed the man, looking back once at the gore strewn about the room. The carcass of the monster that had attacked Jason was a pile of translucent flesh. Jason wanted to be terrified, to be disgusted. Yet, when he looked in the wretched milk-white eyes of the dead creature, he saw something there that he did not expect. It was sadness, or maybe even relief, as if the monster's death had relieved a terrible burden and could now finally rest. Jason didn't have time to ponder this for too long, as the man guided him through different passages that seemed to appear before him in ways that didn't make any sense. The house was constantly changing now. Rooms, windows, and halls appeared out of nowhere, seemingly at the man's whim. Whenever a denizen's shadow or form would appear, the man would take a sharp turn, often directly into a dead end. Yet a way would open, and they would pass by the hunting things unharmed and unmolested. The man moved fast, seeming to glide more than walk. It was all Jason could do to keep up. He wanted to ask questions, yet he was so out of breath from the fast pace that he couldn't form the words. Finally, the man came to a stop. Jason looked around. They had come to a chamber that resembled the temple of the false god he had encountered. The statues were different, yet they had similar ominous overtones. "Why did you bring me here?" Jason said, still catching his breath. The man did not answer immediately. He waved his hand in front of him and uttered a strange incantation. A symbol appeared over the smooth stone wall. It was eerily similar to the one he had been pulled through. Instinctively, he backed away. "You have a choice, Jason," the man said. This stopped the boy in his tracks. "What choice?" Jason said. The man turned to face him, his face still hidden in the shadow underneath the cowl of his hooded robe. "Through this door is the back to your world," the man said. "You can leave now, and be free from this place. Even as he spoke, the symbol began to glow with a strange light. "No," Jason said without hesitation. "I won't leave without my friends." The man seemed to study him for a moment. Then he said, "Very well, but just know that I am not invincible in this place. In here, the Watchers are absolute. We must pray they do not find us."